Hey everyone, welcome to a very special video. I started the Transcontinental Railfan YouTube channel in 2015, or some of you may remember it as Across the United States Railfan, but more on that later. I started this channel simply to try it out and make simple videos of trains going by. Fast forward to May of 2025, I have captured so many trains across the United States, made Railfan updates and announcements videos, as well as other videos showing my railroad collections. In this video, I will go over special highlights and trips that were made each year during the past 10 years. Also, to make things more interesting, I will include photos of trains that were never featured in this YouTube channel. So without further ado, this is the Transcontinental Railfan 10 Years in Review. As some of you may know already, that one of my most memorable catches in 2015 was seeing Amtrak -8 number 513 in Phase 4 livery. I've also caught this unit a few more times before it was painted into Phase 5 livery. Things got more exciting from there as I saw 611 under steam for the first time in 2015, which was the last year of Norfolk Southern's 21st Century Steam program. And I also rode on one of the first excursions from Manassas to Front Royal, Virginia and back on board the former Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy dome car, the Stampede Pass, which is now part of a passenger rail service in Mexico. And then a few family members and I experienced our first cross-country Amtrak trip. The first part of our trip was from Chicago, Illinois to East Glacier Park, Montana, on board Amtrak's Empire Builder. We saw many BNSF freight trains along the way before we arrived at the East Glacier Park station and stayed overnight at the Glacier Park Lodge. During our visit, my family and I went on an all-day vintage red bus tour, and the Glacier Park red buses give various tours to visitors around the Glacier National Park area. After our visit to Glacier National Park, it was back on the westbound Empire Builder to our next destination, Seattle, Washington. The highlight of this visit was going up to the famous Space Needle and seeing Mount Rainier in the distance on a clear sunny day. After we spent a couple nights in Seattle, we head further south to Portland, Oregon, but we made a stop to ride the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad located in LP, Washington. Hammond Lumber Company number 17, a 2A2T tank engine, powered our train to Mineral, where we got to see other logging steam locomotives, including the Heisler number 91, Climax locomotive number 10, the Willamette number 2, and the Shea number 11. After the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad, we continued our drive south to Portland, Oregon, and the next day we got to tour the Oregon Rail Heritage Center with Southern Pacific Daylight 4449, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle 700, and Oregon Rail Navigation number 197. The nickel plate painted Alco PA number 190 used to be on display in Portland, Oregon, but as of 2025, the locomotive is now located in northeastern Pennsylvania. Also, as of 2025, nickel plate road number 324 moved to the Ogden Union Station Museum in Utah. After our visit in Portland, Oregon, we were officially on our way back home, but first we took the Coast Starlight from Portland, Oregon to Sacramento, California. There were some beautiful sunset views in southern Oregon, and I was very fortunate enough to ride on a Pacific Polar car while on the Coast Starlight, as they are no longer in service on Amtrak but have found second lives working on railroad museums and tourist railroads. My family and I arrived in Sacramento about 6 in the morning thanks to the Coast Starlight train arriving 30 minutes early. However, our California Zephyr train to Chicago would experience delays already as the locomotives were suffering mechanical issues. After the mechanical issues on the locomotives were resolved, the train eventually arrived in Sacramento a few hours late, but my family and I boarded the train and left Sacramento later in the evening. And around dinner time, we had a stunning view of the mountains in eastern California. And the sun started to set as soon as we crossed into eastern Nevada. Now typically the eastbound California Zephyr train stops in Salt Lake City in the middle of the night, but thanks to the delay, we were able to see Salt Lake City in the daytime. A while after Salt Lake City, we passed through a small town known as Helper, Utah. But unfortunately, the continuous delays would not allow my family and I to see the Moffett Tunnel and Denver, Colorado in the daytime. But the scenery changed significantly as we were going through Nebraska and Iowa. And after a 10-hour delay into Chicago, unfortunately my family and I would miss our connecting Capital Limited train back to Pittsburgh. But since we had sleeper car accommodations, Amtrak put us in a nice 3-star hotel in Chicago. So after my family and I spent the next morning and afternoon in Chicago, we eventually got back on the Capital Limited to Pittsburgh, as we started seeing Norfolk Southern freight trains east of Chicago. The summer of 2015 wasn't over yet, because about a month later, my family and I hopped on the Pennsylvania to Greensburg, rounded the world-famous Horseshoe Curve for the first time ever, and visited the city of Altoona for the first time. During our first visit in Altoona, we spent a few hours at the Railroaders Memorial Museum touring the exhibits. After that, we made our way to the Horseshoe Curve, and as we were walking up the stairs, I hear a horn, so I had to run up there as quickly as possible, and I got there just in time to get this shot of the Erie Heritage Unit. After railfanning at the Horseshoe Curve for a few hours, we made our way back to downtown Altoona to catch the westbound Pennsylvania train back to Greensburg. A few weeks after school started, my family and I decided to make a trip up to Philadelphia for a weekend to not only see a family member, but also take a look at the exhibits during Amtrak Train Days event at the Philadelphia's 30th Street station. A handful of locomotives and rolling stock were on display during Amtrak Train Days, including Veterans Unit number 642, non-power control F40PH number 406, the Amtrak exhibit train, as well as regular passenger cars. We even got to walk through a Viewliner baggage car as well as Amtrak's theater car with a big window on the observation end of the car. After touring the exhibits and displays, we made our way to the parking garage of the Philadelphia station where we got to hang out with some rail fans and watch Amtrak trains go in and out of the Philadelphia station. Mostly in the first half of 2016, I ended up catching more trains in Northern Virginia with some unusual catches, including the CSX Standard Cab -8 locomotive. Then in early June, I ended up seeing 611 under steam again at the Manassas Railroad Festival, and this 1950s era streamlined steam locomotive gives contrast to the modern day VRE commuter trains. And probably the biggest highlight in 2016 was attending the National Railway Historical Society Rail Camp. Since 1998, the NRHS Rail Camp provides high school age students a week's worth of learning about railroad operations firsthand, including track work. The East Coast camp consists of 2 days at Amtrak in the Wilmington, Delaware area, and then 3 days at the Strasburg Railroad and the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. I have put together a playlist of my rail camp experience, so if you haven't seen it yet, go check out the playlist on my YouTube channel. Not too long after the rail camp, it was another trip out west, but this time out to Northern California. While I was there, I did some rail fanning at the Emeryville Amtrak station, took a ride on the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine Railroad, rode the Napa Valley Wine Train, and as well as taken a short ride on board Caltrain. Fast forward to the fall of 2024, much of the Nippon Sharyo gallery cars as well as the F40PH locomotives were replaced by new electric train sets made by Stadler. The next summer rail adventure I had in 2016 was a weekend trip put on by the Washington, D.C. chapter of the NRHS. Day 1 consisted of a steam photo charter on the Everett Railroad, while Day 2 was a tour of the East Broadtop Railroad several years before the railroad would reopen under new management. "2017 was off to a great start as I spent a day with some rail fans at Point of Rocks, Maryland. This is an interesting place to railfan as multiple CSX freight trains pass through this location, with CSX trains going on the Metropolitan Subdivision, which leads more directly towards Washington, D.C. going eastbound, and the old main line, which leads more directly to Baltimore, Maryland going eastbound. About a month or two later, I caught Norfolk Southern's Norfolk and Western Heritage Unit number 8103 over Norfolk Southern's Van Dorn Terminal in Alexandria. Fast forward to the summer of 2017, my family and I made a trip across Colorado where we got to visit the Colorado Railroad Museum, rode the Pikes Peak Cog Railway, the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad, and the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. Back to railfanning the CSX RF&P subdivision in Alexandria, one of my friends and I one day caught a Norfolk Southern SD60E trailing on a Bare Tables train and a Canadian National SD70M-2 trailing on a Manifest train. Another weekend trip occurred as some of my family members took my friend and I to southwestern Virginia to visit the Chesapeake and Ohio Rail Heritage Center and Clifton Forge, as well as the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, Virginia. I was also very happy to see Norfolk and Western 2156 up close at Roanoke, as the locomotive was on loan to the museum at the time. Then, a few years later, in 2020, the 2156 would then return to its home at the National Museum of Transportation in Kirkwood, Missouri. The next big railfan trip in the summer of 2017 was with a best friend out to Fostoria, Ohio, where we got to see heavy CSX and Norfolk Southern freight action. The Iron Triangle Park sees heavy action on the CSX Willard subdivision, the CSX Columbus subdivision, and the Norfolk Southern Fostoria district. Over the course of a few days, we caught a lot of unique catches, including a BNSF war bonnet unit trailing on a CSX Autorack train. To finish the trip off, we spent a few hours in Bellevue, Ohio, where we caught some Norfolk Southern freight trains, as well as a Wheeling and Lake Erie freight train with a colorful consist. The fall of 2017 would mark my first semester at Penn State Altoona, where I'd spend a majority of the following 4 years at. And being close to the active Pittsburgh line, it really didn't take long for me to capture all 20 Norfolk Southern Heritage units throughout the next 4 years. After capturing the Illinois Terminal Heritage unit in either September or October, I would then capture the Central of Georgia Heritage unit sitting at the Juniata shops in early December 2017. There were even more interesting catches in Altoona, including this Allegheny Valley Railroad EMD locomotive number 3001. Fast forward to the summer of 2018, my best friend and I went down to Folkston, Georgia and spent a few nights there catching heavy CSX train action. What made this trip even more special is that we stayed overnight in one of the caboose cabins. This caboose cabin comes with 2 bunk beds, a sleeper sofa, a kitchenette, a bathroom of course, and plenty of windows to view the tracks. And also let me know in the comments down below if you stayed in one of these caboose cabins in Folkston, Georgia. Another highlight for the summer of 2018 was visiting my first National Railway Historical Society convention. The 2018 convention was headquartered in Cumberland, Maryland, but unfortunately I wasn't able to attend the entire convention. The first event day of the convention was a 3-hour bus ride to the Cass Scenic Railroad, and then it was a one-way excursion from Cass to the town of Elkins, West Virginia. The first part of the trip was riding the Cass Scenic Railroad's Bald Knob train from the town of Cass to the junction at Old Spruce. There we would meet our Cheat Mountain Salamander excursion train for the rest of the way to Elkins. As a bonus, the diesel train performed a couple of run-bys at milepost 60 before completing our trip to Elkins. This Elkins depot was originally built by the Western Maryland Railway back in 1908. On another day, I caught Western Maryland Scenic Railroad GP3 number 501 in the red and white circus paint scheme, pulling its train back into Cumberland after completing a trip to Frostburg, Maryland. Then I went back up to Altoona for another round of semesters at Penn State Altoona. I continued to get great catches on the Pittsburgh line, including this former CSX SD70 ACE, a power move with a bunch of SD80 Max, and the Pennsylvania Railroad Heritage unit number 8102. Then I also visited the Everett Railroad a few times because who doesn't love an operating steam locomotive near your school? One day during my fall break for Penn State Altoona, I visited Shenandoah Junction, West Virginia and caught several freight trains, including a Norfolk Southern train with a former CSX AC6000 and an intermodal train with some BNSF locomotives leading. As it got closer to the end of the year, I spent a day chasing a Norfolk Southern intermodal train with the PRLX SD70 ACE and a PRLX AC6000, the third unit trailing. Then the last rail adventure of 2018 was a visit to Hagerstown, Maryland. Folks can visit the Hagerstown Roundhouse Museum that sits next to an active CSX freight yard. They also have historic trains on display, as well as 2 floors worth of model trains. "2019 was definitely one of my best years of rail fanning, and this was one of the handful of the highlights. During the winter of 2019, I was notified via a Facebook group that Norfolk Southern was doing a photo shoot with some of their DC to AC conversion locomotives. So some of my friends from Penn State Altoona and I made our way to the spot where you can see the turntable and the Norfolk Southern Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania. We even got to see and meet Casey Thompson, who was once the official photographer for Norfolk Southern. One day in the early spring, I caught Norfolk Southern's Conrail and Reading Heritage units working together on an intermodal train heading westbound. In early May 2019 was not only the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, but also the 2019 NRHS convention. Day 1 consisted of a tour on Utah Transit Authority's light rail system. Day 2 consisted of the first celebration ceremony, with Union Pacific Big Boy 4014 and the Union Pacific 844 facing each other in Ogden, Utah. Nearby was the Ogden Union Station Train Museum with many pieces of rail equipment on display, including another Union Pacific FEF Class 484, number 833. Then day 3 of the convention was the May 10th, 2019 celebration ceremony over at the Golden Spike National Historic Site in Promontory, Utah. However, during the ceremony, this site would change its title from Golden Spike National Historic Site to Golden Spike National Historical Park. Of course, Union Pacific number 119 and Central Pacific Jupiter number 60 looked fantastic fired up for display. Unfortunately, the original ones did not survive for preservation, but these two are replicas that were built by O'Connor Engineering's laboratories in Costa Mesa, California back in 1979. Unfortunately, the 4th day of the convention didn't go as planned because during a Heber Valley Railroad excursion, as we were about to leave the station, one of the cars and the locomotive derailed. My YouTube channel was previously known as Across the United States Railfan, however the 150th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad was the inspiration of changing the name Transcontinental Railfan. Later on in the summer, I participated in a week-long Next Generation Railroaders boot camp over at the North Carolina Transportation Museum in Spencer. As we got closer to the 4th of July weekend in 2019, I was lucky enough to catch the CSX Veterans Unit as well as the First Responders Unit leading a short military train through Alexandria on its way to Washington, D.C. Not only was 2019 the year for the Big Boy 4014, but also a year for the Norfolk and Western J Class number 611. A couple of guys and I chased the Norfolk and Western 611's ferry move to Strasburg from Buena Vista, Virginia to Shenandoah Junction, West Virginia, with it just in the span of less than 2 days. This photo was taken in Norfolk Southern's yard in the town of Shenandoah, Virginia on the 2nd day of the chase. Then about a month later, I introduced some Penn State Altoona folks the Norfolk and Western 611 at Strasburg. I saw both 611 and 475 under steam during the 2 of the 4 weekends that the 611 was there in 2019. And it was definitely worth buying a $5 ticket to blow 611's whistle. Shout out to the guy helping me capture that moment on video. So after visiting 611 at Strasburg for the 2nd time in 2019, the Lakeshore Railway Museum and CSX Transportation were holding a special event. And during that weekend, CSX had all 3 of its Pride and Service diesel locomotives on display at the museum, including the Veterans Unit, the First Responders Unit, and the Law Enforcement Unit. Later on, during the fall semester of 2019 at Penn State Altoona, several Penn State Altoona students and I were very lucky to tour Norfolk Southern's Juniata shops. While 2020 wasn't the best year due to the pandemic, I was able to capture one neat train on the Reading and Northern Railroad. My friend and I caught and also chased 2 of former Norfolk Southern's F units, number 270 and 275, on an excursion from Reading Outer Station to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. As we were wrapping up 2020, I caught a few Amtrak trains crossing over Powell's Creek at Leesylvania State Park in Woodbridge, Virginia, just a few ways south of Washington, D.C. This is another great place to railfan on the CSX RFMP subdivision. As things started to get better in 2021, I was trying to think of another new series to add to my YouTube channel, so then I came up with Railfan updates and announcements. And ever since February of 2021, this series has been a major driving force for the YouTube channel. The purpose of this series is to inform other folks from around the world exciting things going on in the railfanning hobby, ranging from train shows, steam locomotive restoration projects, expanded passenger rail service, and more. I began sharing railroad news in the United States only, but later expanded my interest in Canada and the UK. My family and I then did more trips after the pandemic, including a trip to the Walkersville and Southern Railroad to ride behind General Coal Company tank engine number 85. Then later in the summer, my family and I finally got to ride Amtrak's auto train from Lorton, Virginia to Sanford, Florida and back. And we had an amazing time seeing the beautiful countryside in the southeastern United States. And to top it all off, we rode this Amtrak train a few months after Amtrak turned 50 years old, as Amtrak was founded in May 1st of 1971. The biggest highlight of 2022 was a trip on board the Autumn Colors Express Excursion, formerly known as the New River Train. This excursion train used to operate day trips from Huntington to Hinton, West Virginia and back through the scenic New River Gorge in mid-October each year. My family and I rode in the Milwaukee Road painted lounge car named Wisconsin Valley, owned by the Railroading Heritage of Midwest America, also known as the Friends of the 261. The excursion trip had a 3-hour layover in the town of Hinton, West Virginia for the Hinton's Railroad Days Festival. And a visit to Hinton isn't complete without a visit to the Hinton Railroad Museum. This museum has so many railroad artifacts, and during railroad days, there was also a little train show on the second floor of this museum. However, little did we know that 2022 would be the final year of the Autumn Colors Express excursions or New River trains. Unfortunately, the Autumn Colors Express trains would be discontinued due to Amtrak raising their rates on moving private cars around, which unfortunately seemed to make the excursion trains not economically feasible anymore. The only big trip of 2023 was by attending the National Railway Historical Society convention that was held in Deerfield Beach, Florida. Our first day was with Brightline, as we started off with a tour at one of their facilities in West Palm Beach. Then it was a round trip on board the Brightline trains from West Palm Beach to Miami and back. The second event day of the convention was on board a U.S. Sugar Steam excursion with former Florida East Coast 462 Pacific number 148. This was a round-trip excursion from the locomotive shops in Clewiston, Florida, to Lake Placid and return. On the third event day of the convention, half of the convention goers and I chose the Miami Transit Tour, where we spent a day riding Tri-Rail, Miami's Metro Rail, and the Metro Mover. On the final day of the 2023 convention, many more convention goers and I hopped on Tri-Rail down to the Miami Airport station. From there, we would then hop on our motor coaches for the rest of the way to the Gold Coast Railroad Museum to spend a day there. There is a lot of railroad equipment to be seen here, and many of the convention goers and I hopped on short train rides that took us back and forth between the museum complex and the CSX interchange. Later in November 2023, my family and I visited to Las Vegas to spend a few days there, and we even got to ride the Las Vegas monorail. Also, if you're a rail fan visiting the area, I highly recommend visiting the Nevada State Railroad Museum in Boulder City, just outside of Las Vegas. "2024 was another amazing year for catches and trips. In early February of 2024, I caught my first Amtrak P42DC locomotive in the new Phase 7 livery. A few months later, I caught my first ever CSX Heritage unit, this one honoring the Seaboard Coastline Railroad. This locomotive was numbered 1967 because it was the same year that the Atlantic Coastline and the Seaboard Airline Railroads merged together to form the Seaboard Coastline. Later in the summer of 2024, I made a return trip to Altoona, Pennsylvania. Not only did I spend a few days watching Norfolk Southern freight trains roll through the city of Altoona, but also spent a day visiting the Railroaders Memorial Museum again to check out the Penn State Altoona SD60I and Pennsylvania Railroad 1361's fully painted tender. The next Pennsylvania adventure in 2024 was a trip to the National Railway Historical Society convention that was held in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Before we checked in for the convention, we spent an hour or two railfanning Norfolk Southern at the historic Rockville Bridge just outside of Harrisburg. The first day of the convention featured a train ride at the Strasburg Railroad and a visit to the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. The second day of the convention featured the Rock Hill Trolley Museum and the East Broad Top Railroad, where I got to see Mikado steam locomotive number 16 under steam for the first time. The next event day of the convention was a special excursion on board the Reading and Northern RTC cars. This special excursion train featured a couple of photo run-bys, a visit to the Minersville station for a lunch stop, and the Reading and Northern steam shops in Port Clinton, Pennsylvania. During the steam shop tour, we got up close and personal with the 484 number 2102 and the 462 Pacific number 425. The last event day of the 2024 convention started off at the Middletown and Humbolstown Railroad. The railroad's former Western Maryland number 151 led a couple of photo run-bys down the street running track with a freight consist. After our time at the Middletown-Humbolstown Railroad, the original plan was to take a train ride at the Northern Central Railroad, but unfortunately that part of the trip was cancelled due to a diesel locomotive breakdown. However, the NRHS really made it up for us by arranging motor coaches to take us to the Williams Grove Steam Train Association, where Pennsylvania Railroad 643 currently operates at. The convention goers enjoyed their rides behind 643 as well as walk around the grounds during the Steam Festival. On Veterans Day weekend of 2024, my family and I made a trip to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, where we spent a day watching trains as well as catching Amtrak's first southbound Floridian. The first train I caught in 2025 was a southbound Amtrak Floridian train, with the Day 1 Heritage Unit number 301 leading the way. Then fast forward to early May of 2025, I made my first visit to the Timonium Train Show at the Maryland State Fairgrounds just north of Baltimore. Then about a week later, I made my first visit to the Martinsburg Roundhouse Rail Festival with a train show and other activities that were going on. Then in late May of 2025, I caught another CSX Heritage Unit honoring the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. Then on the very last day of May of 2025, my family and I made a visit to Warrenton, Virginia to check out the Warrenton Branch Line Rail Trail. A former Norfolk and Western caboose and other railroad artifacts can be seen along the trail. Then in the middle of July of 2025, there was another exciting National Railway Historical Society convention that was headquartered in Lansing, Michigan. The first event day of the convention was a Steam Railroading Institute diesel excursion from Clare to Owasso, Michigan. At Owasso, we got to check on the status of the repairs on the Pierre Marquette 284 Berkshire number 1225. The second event day of the convention was a steam-powered excursion on both the Little River Railroad and the Indiana Northeastern Railroad. The day started off with the Little River Railroad 110 performing a photo run-by at the Coldwater Station, and it would take us for the first 6 miles from Coldwater to Quincy, Michigan. At Quincy, the train met up with the Nickel-Plate Railroad Berkshire number 765, and the locomotives would do a power swap as the 110 would uncouple from the train, and the 765 would then couple onto the train and would take over for the rest of the trip. After the 765 took us to Hillsdale, Michigan for a lunch stop, we then made our way to Montgomery, Michigan while the 765 performed some photo run-bys. The third event day of the convention was a day in Elkhart, Indiana. In the morning, convention goers were treated to special tours at the Adams Westlake factory that has been fabricating small parts for railroad equipment for many years, even railroad lanterns. Then in the afternoon, our buses took us over to the National New York Central Railroad Museum, where we got to see many of the pieces of equipment on display, including the New York Central 3001, that will be restored to operation by the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. After eating lunch at the Railroad Museum, Norfolk Southern gave us special tours of their Elkhart yard, and this is the second largest rail yard in the entire Norfolk Southern system. The last event day of the 2025 convention featured a visit to the Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. Not only was the Mason Bogie Torch Lake Steam Locomotive number 3 running trains around the park, but also Detroit and Lima Northern number 7 was also under steam for some test firing. Then in the afternoon, our buses took us over to the Michigan Central Station in Detroit. Convention goers were given a special tour of the station itself, and currently there is public space, offices for the Ford Motor Company, and plans called to have hotel rooms on some of the top floors of the station building. After this final event day and the meeting day, the 2025 convention came to a close. However, our first visit to Michigan would not be complete without a visit and a train ride at the Huckleberry Railroad in Flint, Michigan. So there you have it, Transcontinental Railfan in the first 10 years. And I want to thank everyone for making these trips and experiences possible. And also a big thank you goes out to those who have watched my videos, liked, comment, subscribed, and really helping this channel get to where it is today. And I look forward to making more videos and also making more trips for the next 10 years and beyond. And also, your continued support really means a lot to me, as a good portion of the ad revenue that this channel has made was donated towards railroad museums, historical societies, and restoration projects across the United States. Again, thank you all so much for an incredible 10 years of YouTube. This is Transcontinental Railfan, and I'll see you in another video.